At the epicenter of the void, where humanity itself seemed to have been revoked by decree, lay the landscape of the larger. It was not just a geographical place of barbed wire and rotting wooden barracks. It was a state of being, an ontological experience designed for annihilation. The air one breathed was an acrid mixture of crematorium smoke, thin turnip soup, and the metallic stench of fear. The cold was not just a sensation on the skin, it was an entity that seeped into the bones, that froze the marrow, that made the simple act of closing one's hand a Herculean task. The sound was a perpetual cacophony of orders shouted in a strange language, the shuffling of feet in wooden clogs, the hacking coughs and suppressed weeping that punctuated the endless nights. This was ground zero. Here, the process of dehumanization was an exact science. The name, that first pillar of identity, was amputated, replaced by a number engraved in fire and ink on the skin, the stigma of cattle marked for slaughter. Clothing, the bearers of individuality and personal history, was exchanged for identical striped and torn uniforms that eliminated any distinction. Family, work, loves, possessions, everything that wove the tapestry of a life was reduced to ashes, to memories that for many became more a source of torture than consolation. The body itself was systematically degraded by hunger that transformed men into walking skeletons, obsessed with the slightest glimpse of a piece of moldy bread. The future was a blank wall, the past an abyss of loss. In this hellish laboratory, where the limits of human matter were tested, a question loomed, heavier than the smoke and colder than the Polish winter. What happens when everything is taken away from a man? When the structure of his life, his identity and his dignity is demolished, what if anything remains standing amid the rubble? It was in this scenario of absolute denial that prisoner 11994, a Viennese neurologist and psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl, found the answer. With the acuity of a trained observer and the sensitivity of a soul that refused to die, he perceived a transcendent truth. His captors, the masters of this universe of pain, held an almost godlike power over his body and his environment. They controlled the stimulus, the kick, the insult, the hunger, the selection of left or right. All these were beyond his control. Yet Frankl discovered that between the stimulus and his response, no matter how immediate and brutal the aggression, there existed a space, a tiny, almost imperceptible space, but one that contained the entire universe. Within this sacred interlude resided the last, the most inviolable, the most powerful of human freedoms, the freedom to choose one's attitude toward the inevitable. This was not a freedom of action, but a freedom of being. The choice was not about what happened, but about how one faced what happened. It was the fundamental bifurcation of the soul, the point of divergence that separated two existential paths, the path of the victim and the path of the witness. It was the decision that ultimately determined whether an individual would become a mere plaything of circumstances, a passive reflection of horror, or whether he would assert himself as a spiritual being capable of forging meaning in the heart of the absurd. Let us delve deeper into the psychology of the victim. The victim is the one who merges with her suffering. Her identity becomes the pain inflicted upon her. She is the number on her arm, the hunger in her stomach, the fear in her heart. The strings of her existence are pulled by external forces. She becomes a puppet in the hands of her oppressors. Her inner monologue is a constant echo of the brutality that surrounds her. Look what they did to me. They stole my life. I am nothing. I am an object. It is a narrative of powerlessness, of externalized guilt, and while understandable, it is a spiritual trap. By defining herself exclusively by what was taken from her, the victim concedes the final victory to her torturer. The access guard not only controls her physical freedom, but also colonizes her consciousness, dictating her internal states of despair, hatred, and resignation. The concentration camp expands beyond the barbed wire and occupies the totality of her being. The witness, on the other hand, undertakes the most radical of rebellions. She does not deny reality. The pain is real, the cold is real, the hunger is real. The witness does not float above suffering in blissful denial. She faces it head-on, feels it in every fiber of her being, but refuses to be defined by it. This is where she activates the power of the inner attitude. She understands that although her body is imprisoned, her mind, her consciousness, her spirit remain sovereign territory. The witness becomes the guardian of an inner sanctuary. Frankl described how this fortress was built and maintained. It was an act of mental and spiritual discipline. It was closing one's eyes amid the filth of the barracks and allowing oneself to see, with hallucinatory clarity, the face of one's beloved wife, to hear her voice, to feel the tenderness of her gaze. This love, summoned from memory, became a presence more real and more potent than the surrounding despair. It was the mental reconstruction, piece by piece, of the scientific manuscript that had been confiscated from him upon arrival at the camp, an act that not only preserved his work, but gave him an intellectual purpose, a reason to keep his mind sharp and alive. It was the ability to find a dark humor in the situation, to tell a joke about the absurdity of their lives, a small act of defiance that said, "You can kill us, but you cannot kill our ability to laugh at you." It was the rapt appreciation of a sunset over the Bavarian plains, its vibrant colors painting the clouds behind the barbed wire, a glimpse of transcendent beauty that man's horror could not tarnish. This inner oasis was not an escape but an affirmation. The victim allows the ugliness of the outside world to ravage his inner landscape. The witness irrigates his secret garden with love, beauty, purpose, and humor, and it is from this inner wellspring that he draws the strength to endure the unbearable. This fundamental distinction leads us to the ethical pivot of Frankl's thought, the transition from victim to responsibility. The victim mentality, by focusing on what has been done to it, relinquishes its agency. The responsibility lies entirely with the other, the aggressor, the system. The central question, "Why did this happen to me?" is a question that seeks causes in the past, and that in the context of the field has no satisfactory answer, leading to a cycle of bitterness and helplessness. The witness performs a Copernican revolution in her perspective. She does not deny the aggressor's responsibility, but acknowledges and assumes her own inalienable responsibility for her response. The crucial question changes. It ceases to be why, and becomes, what does life now expect of me? This is the essence of responsibility, the ability to respond. Frankl insisted that man should not ask what the meaning of his life is, but rather recognize that he is the one being questioned by life, daily and hourly, and his answer cannot be given in words, but in right action and conduct. Life becomes an examiner, and the individual's responsibility is to respond in kind. For one, the response might be to care for a sick comrade, sharing his water ration. For another, it might simply be to bear his own fate with dignity without giving in to the animalistic behavior that the environment encourages. In making this transition, a person ceases to be a leaf in the wind, a passive effect, and becomes the cause of his own integrity. He does not control events, but he does have absolute control over the meaning he gives to them. It is the retaking of the helm of his own soul. But how can suffering, especially suffering as grotesque and seemingly purposeless as that of the Holocaust, be imbued with meaning? This is the question that goes to the heart of logotherapy, the discovery of meaning in suffering. Frankl identified three main paths to meaning in life. The first is through creation, through doing a job or an act. The second is through experience, through meeting someone, love, or encountering something, beauty, nature. But the third path is the most radical and the most relevant to extreme situations. When we are confronted with suffering that we cannot change, we are challenged to find meaning in the very attitude with which we endure it. Suffering, in this view, ceases to be an obstacle to meaning and becomes a potential source of meaning. There is no meaning in the act of suffering itself, in pain, in illness, in death. Meaning resides in the way in which the human being carries his cross. The situation becomes a whetstone that can either destroy the blade or sharpen it to an extraordinary shine. The victim sees pain as the final proof of the absurdity of life. The witness sees it as a task, the most difficult of all, that offers him the opportunity to realize the highest values such as courage, compassion, and dignity. It is the chance to transform tragedy into a triumph of the spirit, to prove that there is something in man that transcends his earthly destiny. Suffering becomes the pedestal on which the statue of human dignity can be erected. This was no armchair philosophy. Frankl witnessed the incarnation of this truth. He saw with his own eyes the example of the anonymous martyrs, whose greatness would not be recorded in any history book. Let us imagine a scene based on his accounts. A cold night in the barracks. A man, little more than a spectre, receives his daily ration, a thin slice of brown bread and a watery broth. He is wasting away, every cell in his body cries out for nourishment. He looks at his bread, the most valuable treasure in this universe. Beside him, a young man, newly arrived and even weaker, weeps silently, consumed by fever and despair. The first man hesitates for a moment. The battle rages within him, animal self-preservation against the impulse of the spirit. Then, with a slow and deliberate gesture, he breaks his bread in half and offers half to the young man. In that act, in that moment, he is no longer a prisoner, a number. He is humanity itself in its most sublime expression. He is actively choosing compassion over survival at any cost. Frankl saw men who, on their way to the gas chamber, offered a prayer not for themselves but for their guards. These acts were living, irrefutable proof that choice existed. They were the flame that proved that darkness was not absolute. To feed this flame, future projection was a vital psychological tool. The victim's consciousness is trapped in the immediate present, a cycle of pain and deprivation. The future is unimaginable, the past an open wound. The witness, on the other hand, uses the uniquely human capacity to project himself through time. He builds a mental bridge that takes him beyond the barbed wire. Frankl practiced this as a spiritual exercise. Standing in the freezing mud during the hours-long morning count, he transported himself. He did not just think about the future, he lived it in his mind with a sensory intensity. He felt the soft touch of the wood of a pulpit beneath his fingers. He saw the warm light of a university auditorium, heard the attentive silence of the students, felt the comfort of his clean clothes and the satisfying weight of his own books in his hands. And he delivered his lecture, detailing the psychological reactions of the prisoners, transforming their present agony into material for his future purpose. This why, the purpose of teaching, of helping, of bearing witness, gave him the strength to endure anyhow. The future was not a fantasy of escape, but an anchor of meaning that steadied his soul in the midst of the storm. When the storm finally passed and the gates opened, the struggle did not end. It merely changed form. Frankl accurately diagnosed the danger of the prisoner mentality that afflicted many survivors. After the dizzying euphoria of liberation came a deep bitterness. The world they returned to was not the paradise they had dreamed of. People did not understand. Life went on with shocking indifference. Many survivors felt that their immense suffering gave them a free pass, a moral credit that exempted them from life's petty responsibilities. How dare you ask me to be patient in traffic after all I have been through? They became professional victims, using their past trauma as a shield and a weapon. They left the camp, but the camp did not leave them. True liberation, Frankl argued, was a second choice. The choice not to let the past dictate the rest of one's life. The choice to free oneself from one's own bitterness. The choice to take responsibility for finding joy and meaning again in an imperfect world. This demonstrates that the choice between victim and witness is fundamentally the daily choice. The fairness of Auschwitz only revealed this dynamic in its most extreme form. All of us, in our infinitely more comfortable lives, face the same bifurcation every hour. Faced with a failed project, an unfair criticism, a frightening medical diagnosis, a heartbreak, the space between stimulus and response presents itself. The victim's response is to complain, to blame, to self-pity. The witness's response is to pause, to breathe, to ask, okay, this happened. What is the most dignified and constructive response now? What can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? Everyday life is a gym for the spirit. Each small choice to respond with awareness rather than reacting with automatism strengthens the muscle of inner freedom, preparing us for the inevitably greater challenges. At its peak, the witness's journey takes her to a place of profound spiritual alchemy. the transformation of suffering into service. The victim holds on to her pain, which becomes an insurmountable identity. The witness, having walked through the fire, uses her scars not as a reminder of her frailty, but as a map to help others navigate. She becomes the archetype of the wounded healer. Her personal experience of the abyss gives her an authority and empathy that no theory can teach. Frankl himself is the supreme example. He did not repress his experience, he distilled it into logotherapy, a legacy to humanity. His personal suffering, which could have destroyed him, became the source of healing for countless others. He bore witness, and in doing so, he redeemed his own pain, giving it its highest possible meaning, service. The witness ultimately understands that the question, "Why did I suffer?" is answered when her story becomes a beacon of hope for someone else. And so, at the end of this long journey through darkness, we come to the blinding light of Frankl's final conclusion, the affirmation of unconditional human dignity. The victim feels that his dignity has been annihilated, that he has been reduced to an animal, to an object. And all the external evidence seems to confirm this. But the witness discovers that human dignity is not an external property, granted by society or circumstances. It is the inextinguishable essence of the spirit. It cannot be given, and therefore cannot be taken away. It does not depend on health, strength, intelligence, or usefulness. It is unconditional. This dignity is not destroyed by suffering. It is revealed by the way in which suffering is faced. The man who shares his bread, the woman who comforts a dying man, the individual who chooses nobility over brutality, even if no one sees it, is declaring to the universe that his worth as a human being lies in his spiritual freedom, a core of light that no external darkness can penetrate. The witness, standing amidst the ruins, is living proof that man is always more than his destiny. He is the sculptor of himself, and in the choice of his attitude, he wields the chisel that can transform the rough stone of suffering into the magnificent statue of a life with meaning.